Okay. Well, on behalf of the League of Women Voters, welcome to this program on community policing. I'm Glenda Keel, and I'd like to introduce my co-moderator and fellow League of Women Voters board member, Courtney Gallop. Wave at us, Courtney. That's good.
I have Chief Webster on the phone. Craig, he's having trouble getting in.
Okay, I'll send him the link again. I'll send him another invite.
Okay, thanks, Craig. Chief Webster, he's sending you another fresh link, okay, to click on. Okay, sir. Okay, guys, go ahead.
A little bit of technical difficulty here, but in addition to introducing you to Courtney, I wanted to introduce you, or at least to express our appreciation for our Zoom facilitator, Craig Merrill. Right now, he's helping our fourth panelist get into the program. You should know, I guess, that the program is being recorded and that it will be shown on our website. Let me go ahead and tell you a little bit about the program format. Of course, we regret that the COVID pandemic has made it necessary to do the program virtually. But on the plus side, we've been able to extend our geographic reach, and we have one of our panelists is from the North Carolina Department of Justice. In order to adapt the program to a format suitable for Zoom, we've decided that I'll moderate the opening and the first part of the program, and Courtney will moderate the second part and the closing segment. Now, before the closing segment, we have allowed time for you in the audience to ask questions. In the Q&A section, Courtney and I will alternate reading the questions that you type in. And
Glenda?
Yes?
We need for Craig to call Chief Webster to get him in. Sorry, he's having difficulties. He's trying to get in.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Chief Webster. Craig. Craig.
Yes.
Can you call Chief Webster at 843-241-5438 and give him a quick tutorial?
Gotcha.
Okay, thanks. Chief Webster, Craig's calling you. Okay, thank you, sir. Bye. Thank you, Glenda.
Okay. We'll go ahead with the program. Chief Webster is one of the later panelists, so hopefully we'll get it all resolved before before he does his time for his presentation. So let me tell you a little bit about the program. The title, Could It Happen Here? Shedding Light on Preventing Tragic Police Encounters in Our Community. And this was chosen to reflect concerns resulting from a recent spate of violent citizen police interactions across the nation. Mostly, I'd say 2 or 3 months ago. And we have a panel of 4 professionals in law enforcement, and they're going to talk about the protocols and practices to ensure that such volatile interactions don't occur. These experts are Carlton Joyner, he's an instructor with the North Carolina Justice Academy in the North Carolina Department of Justice, and that's involved in training a lot of law enforcement officers across the state. Major Jeff Deringer. Jeff, you want to give us a wave?
Good evening.
And he is he's instructor and training coordinator in the Dare County Sheriff's Office. And missing so far, but we hope he'll be joining us soon, is Chief Philip Webster. He's the Chief of Police in Nags Head. And then we have Captain John Towler, who's with the Kill Devil Hills Police Department. And now let's turn to the panel, and we will have Mr. Joyner first. He holds a BS degree in criminal justice and a master's in psychology, and instructs law enforcement officers in a variety of community-oriented courses. In preparing for this program, Courtney and I found that police training is universally acknowledged as a key factor in avoiding and defusing volatile situations. And one of the courses that caught my eye that Mr. Joyner teaches or has taught is community relations before the crisis. A couple of others that I thought looked really interesting that he has taught were just the initials TRRUTH, and that stands for taking race relations and understanding to heart. And then an even more intriguing title I thought was verbal judo. So I leave it to Mr. Joyner now to tell you more about his background and his work at the North Carolina Justice Academy. Mr. Joyner.
Thank you, Glenda, for that introduction. Also, I want to thank you personally for inviting me to be a part of the panelists tonight. Very excited to be a part of this discussion, and looking forward to hear some of the comments and questions that we should field later on as we go forward. Thanks to Craig and Courtney also for being a part of the meeting and our audience. Major Deringer, Chief Towler, I'm not sure if I got that right, and Chief Webster.
Promoted me, but thank you.
As you stated, Glenda, I am employed with the North Carolina Justice Academy, which is tasked with training or within the training division of the North Carolina Department of Justice. There's two primary campuses that roll out training across the state for our law enforcement professionals and criminal justice non-sworn professionals as well. Those two campuses are located, one being in Salemburg in Sampson County, and the other one is in the western part of our state, located in Edneyville, which is in Henderson County. The program, or the academy, was created in 1973, and it was tasked with delivering training materials, conducting training throughout the state. And since that time, we've evolved in terms of being able to go to agencies and do the training there on site as well. In 1998, the Western campus opened up, and it's named after Larry T. Justice, who is a state representative in that part of the state. We have 18 classrooms on the Eastern campus. We have a 200,000 square foot train or driving track. We have a 20,000 volume library. We have a printing department, full-time maintenance staff, full-time housekeeping staff, and just an accumulation of personnel that's been tasked to research and develop materials, provide instruction for officers throughout the state, and et cetera, et cetera. I joined the NCJA in 2016, in February of that year, immediately following a 25-year career with the Greenville Police Department, where I retired. My role at the NCJA includes managing the Community Policing Certificate Program, actually, of which we're here to discuss tonight. Within that 400-hour certificate program, I personally teach 3 of the aforementioned courses you named: the verbal judo, tactical communication for the criminal justice professional, as well as taking race relations and understanding to heart, a program that I did create upon being hired at the NCJA. Community-oriented policing, which is our foundational course within the CPCP program, or the Community Police Certificate Program, as well as crime prevention through environmental design, crime prevention specialist parts 1 and part 2. So with that understanding that community policing is an integral part of what a law enforcement officer is tasked to do, a part of that comes back to training, and it's definitely our goal to instill that in our officers, because we realize that you have to literally do community policing before the crisis hit. in terms of being proactive, it has to begin early on and it has to begin often. That being our foundational course, we stress the importance of building trust in the communities, obviously, particularly when crises occur. Those roles play an integral role in restoring of trust in our brotherhood. When we maybe have a officer-involved shooting incident, we're oftentimes having to rely on our partners in the community to bring back calm to those communities. So the partnership role is stressed very heavily, along with training them in the problem-solving techniques, utilizing what we call the SARA problem-solving model to teach our officers how to go into a situation, and in terms of looking at it from the outside in, figuring out what needs to be done and who we may need to partner with to get the job done. Oftentimes we err by not involving our community in that part of the process. The verbal judo concept, many of you have already heard, I'm sure have heard of that throughout your careers. Essentially what it means, it basically means is how to generate voluntary compliance when dealing with difficult people, how to diffuse or de-escalate situations using words, how to establish a grip on individuals with words. So part of my task as the verbal judo instructor is to give our officers the tools to use as it relates to professional language in establishing a grip on difficult people with words. So we do in that training setting, we'll actually condition our officers by sending them through some real-time scenarios, utilizing members of our staff in these scenarios to put them up under a little stress, if you will. And by placing them up under the stress, we're able to kind of gauge them based on their reactions, and then using that as a teachable moment before we actually back out on the streets and finding ourselves in the midst of a volatile situation. We teach a 5-step method, and this comes directly from the Verbal Judo Institute, and it's a 2-day course that I deliver on that. So that's a little bit about me. I won't suck up all the oxygen right now. We'll probably come back later with some questions, but again, thank you for having me, Glenda.
Thank you very much, Mr. Joyner. Let's go now to our next panelist. He will provide kind of a local perspective on police training. It's Major Jeff Deringer. As I said, he's law enforcement instructor and training coordinator with the Dare County Sheriff's Office. And that office has certified many deputies in what they call CIT, which stands for Crisis Intervention Techniques. Major Deringer's been involved in instructed courses focusing mainly on developing communication skills. And some of the courses I noted that he has been involved in are, one is de-escalating techniques for dealing with persons in crisis. Another is strategies to deal with persons who are deaf or hard of hearing. And then one would be handling domestic violence situations. I'm sure that's one that comes up fairly frequently in local law enforcement. And then he's also taught one in improving law enforcement interactions with minority youth. So I'm going to have Mr. Deringer, Major Deringer, now tell us more about what is done to ensure smooth police intervention and how he trains the police and deputies to do that.
Good evening, Ms. Keel and everybody else. Thank you so much for having us. We do appreciate it. And Sheriff Dowdy really appreciates you inviting the Dare County Sheriff's Office this evening. Community relations is key with one of our missions and goals. We start off with the youth. Sheriff Dowdy runs Camp SALT every summer. It's a free program, and it's not only teaching confidence and getting the school resource officers, who also are deputy sheriffs in the Dare County schools, involved with the kids in trust, teaching them to trust each other in the community and trusting us. So Camp SALT is a real big project that we put a lot of time and effort into, and Sheriff Dowdy really expands on that, because we believe having the youth involved and then involving the parents throughout the community, letting them know that everybody is here to help one another. Personal community relations and getting into the neighborhoods and having that personal contact. We also do a mentoring program to where the deputies go out and we check on people. One of the ladies called me up the other day. Of course, I give my cell phone to anybody. And she says, you know, I really can't get out of the house, and I've gone to the grocery store, but I need some things. Do you know who I can call? And I said, well, you've already called them. And she goes, well, no, I need somebody to go to the grocery store. And I said, that's what we do. And they could not believe that we would go to the grocery store for them. It's not the fact that we do that. It's the fact of the community knowing that we're in the neighborhoods. We're walking around outside the cars. We're giving people our cell phone numbers to say, hey, if you've got something that you just want to talk about because there's something suspicious going on in your neighborhood at night and you don't think you really want to call to have someone dispatched, call us. We'll send somebody or we'll just talk to you about it. But the main thing is interaction in the community and contact. Teaching our guys, show up to the call when they call non-emergency or when they call 911, and figuring out what is the real problem. A lot of times people have preconceived notions about, okay, this is what I've heard, and so now I'm getting called to this house to deal with it. Understanding what the real problem is that night and just talking to people like we're talking tonight. Say, hey, I know you called for this, but tell me what I can do to help. We've also expanded you mentioned the CIT training. They brought it out here. We put a lot of deputies through it. And that's one of the big parts, is understanding the real problem, not just what's going on at this moment. Is there more in-depth things that we need to talk about and understand? Once we get past the stigma of initial, oh, the cops have showed up. Once we get past that and they realize, hey, Jeff is just another person and he's really here to help, to try to figure out what is going on. That takes a few minutes. Building that relationship does not happen instantaneously. And so being in the community beforehand and letting people know, hey, we can just talk. That's what really brings the sheriff's office, police together with the community, so that they can feel like, hey, I can actually talk to them as a person. So that's one of the big things that we're still working on. It's never ending. Whenever we do quit ending that, then we're failing.
Okay. Thank you. Courtney, do you want to introduce the other panelists?
Absolutely, with great honor and anticipation. So, and I for one am very encouraged and very excited about what I've heard so far. So I'm sure we're going to even get more great information. So I'd like to introduce Chief Philip Webster. Chief Webster joined the Nags Head Police Department as police chief in 2019. Previously, he served as chief in the North Myrtle Beach Police Department, where he implemented several training programs on community-oriented policing and problem solving. As chief in Nags Head, he is currently utilizing the 21st Century Policing Task Force report as his framework for moving forward in a community responsive way. Chief Webster, your comments, please.
Y'all, thank y'all for having me. And can you hear me is my first question.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Awesome, awesome. Sorry about the technical difficulty. First of all, I want to say thank you to the League of Women Voters for having this seminar. And Courtney, thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. to just kind of start, I want to talk a little bit about my background in North Myrtle Beach. And I started off in the early 90s in North Myrtle Beach, and we were very much involved with that professional era of policing. And if I could kind of explain that to you, you were meant to ride in your patrol car, go from call to call. You weren't really, community engagement was actually kind of frowned upon. Our shifts, we worked 3 different shifts. We rotated every time we came on. We never worked the same area because the belief at that time was that you're going to become corrupt if you start knowing your citizens. So as time went on through the 90s, the department progressed. We became a community-oriented department. We accepted some grant money and sort of painted over the community-oriented policing, but we really weren't there. So we kept, under different chiefs and bosses, we kept progressing. In 2013, I had the privilege to go to the Southern Police Institute in Louisville, Kentucky. I was a captain then, and that's kind of when the light clicked on in my head. I was at SPI. I was with a bunch of law enforcement professionals. It's a 13-week course for chief executives and law enforcement. Met a lot of folks in some big departments. And the course curriculum was very academic based, research oriented, and like I said, the light clicked on inside of me. So when I went back to North Myrtle Beach with my newfound knowledge, I was pretty quickly appointed to police chief at that point. And there was a couple of programs that I instituted, and just like Courtney said, using the 21st Century Policing Task Force report as my framework. A lot of things, some things we did in North Myrtle Beach, we instituted geographic-based policing, permanent shifts, and it basically, I hate to say forced, but it sort of pushed guys into, you need to learn your community. You need to engage the community and learn the people you police. You need to build up, you talk about goodwill as a bank. You build up that goodwill bank, hoping you never have to pull any funds out of it. But when something bad happens, you need to have that goodwill bank there to be able to pull from. And if you don't, you've got nothing. You've got no support. So we did that in North Myrtle Beach, as well as in the police training officer model, which is sort of replacing the field training officer model as it kind of sweeps around the country. So now that leads me to Nag's Head. You know, came here in January of 2019, great agency, already doing a lot of good things on the ground as far as community-oriented policing. The former chief left this place in good shape, and I'm very fortunate to be able to follow in his footsteps. But like anything, I think you can make improvements. And so using the framework, especially if you know the framework, you're dealing with the 6 pillars in the frame. It's building trust and legitimacy, policy and oversight, technology and social media, community policing and crime reduction, training and education, and finally officer wellness and safety. So going through those, you know, I've kind of ticked off some things that we've done and some areas that we're hoping to get to. For instance, in Pillar 1, procedural justice, being fair and transparent, providing an opportunity for voice, and being impartial in your decision making. I mean, this is just basic stuff that all departments need to be doing. What that gets you is legitimacy. When people see you as a legitimate, they obey and respect your directives and how you have to enforce the law. It's kind of common sense when you think about it. But one of the things that we did was we changed our mission statement from being warrior focused to being guardian focused. Our current mission statement says we are the guardians of life and property in our coastal community. We will deter crime and disorder and be resilient in times of peril. So it's kind of simple. Along with that, officers are encouraged to make non-enforcement community contacts during their discretionary time. And a lot of research has shown there's much more value than getting out and meeting your citizens than there is in just basically riding around in that steel box. You got to get out of that box and meet people. Future areas of training are procedural justice and legitimacy. I have an outside trainer that's going to come in as soon as COVID's over and do some instruction on procedural justice and legitimacy. Working with our recruiting efforts, we've sponsored We've had several sponsorships in the BLET program as far as recruits, and we actually had our first intern from First Flight High School this past year. And currently trying to formulate a cadet program, because moving to North Carolina, I quickly realized, and these guys already knew, the challenges of recruiting in the Outer Banks. It's tough. We have a very, very small pool of candidates, and I want to increase that pool. And I think a cadet program, which some of the agencies have already embraced, but we need to step up our game here in Nags Head. I think having a cadet program will also provide us with some diversity, which, you know, I hate to say it, but we're not a very diverse department right now, and it's kind of sad. It's something I really, really want to change. Policy and oversight, a complete policy rewrite is underway using IACP model policies and policies from the North Carolina Law Enforcement Accreditation Network. Technology and social media. This was a big step for us this past year. We implemented our body-worn camera program. We've already seen great success from that as far as prosecuting crime and being able to diffuse some of those negative citizen encounters. We've been able to see the story from both sides, and it's really been helpful. The department also began a social media footprint this year. And I ask anyone who's viewing this, please go to Nags Head's Facebook page and please like it or follow it, because we're trying to grow this thing. Because not only does that help us brand ourselves, but it's also going to help in our future recruiting efforts, so people can see, you know, what a great place Nags Head and quite frankly the Outer Banks is to come to work. Then in community policing and crime reduction, like I said, just building those relationships. We already have a lot of good programs out there that we're participating in, you know, your Coffee with a Cop, your National Night Out, but it needs to be more than just special programs. It needs to be a daily program. Getting out there, getting officers involved in community problem solving. We've already had a couple of different problems that officers are engaged at their level to help try to mitigate, because they quickly learn that it's a big picture, and it takes traffic on a road or getting a sign erected. It's not just something you just do at a whim. I mean, you really have to engage the community and see what they want, and work with your other departments in your agency or in your town. So it really helps grow them to see that there's more than just the police department. Training and education. We instituted a career progression program in the department. It was actually underway before I came, and so the guys have really embraced that and are going through that process, and that's going to help with our retention as well. And finally, officer wellness and safety, and this is something I think that's sometimes neglected, but it's very important. You know, bulletproof vests for officers, individual first aid kits with tourniquets. And also a big part of that for me was mental wellness. And that's something we did was our annual physical. Now we have a mental wellness piece in there to provide officers with a chance to get help if they need it, and try to destigmatize mental health in law enforcement. But those are some of the things we have going on. There's more, but I think that's enough of a teaser for now.
Excellent, excellent. I live in Nags Head, and I'm feeling more safer and safer by the minute. Thank you, Chief. Last but not least, we're going to introduce our fourth panelist, Captain John Towler. John is a 25-year veteran of the Kill Devil Hills Police Department. He has had over 1,700 hours of police-related training. Captain Towler has also special, unique peacekeeping experience as a civilian peace officer with the United Nations in Kosovo. Captain Towler, would you please give us your introductory remarks, please, regarding tonight's topic?
Thank you, Courtney. I've been in law enforcement since 1995, and as far as local roles are concerned, I have served in just about every one you can imagine. I've been a school resource officer, patrol officer, investigator, internal affairs investigator, and supervisor. But we're already 30 minutes into this or better, and I'm going to punt on my opening statement if we have a bunch of questions lined up. And if we don't have questions, I'll launch into kind of what I was going to talk about.
I don't know about Glenda. I only see one question at this time. We have a couple of suggested questions.
Well, sure. Why don't we get into those, and I'll work in my answers. I'll work my opening statement into the answers if it's possible, and if not, then not hearing from me will not be anyone's great loss.
Okay. Glenda, they want to go to questions.
Okay. Well, I have a question that someone has submitted in advance. And this one, I'm going to direct this one to Captain Webster, or Chief Webster, sorry. In addition to training, hiring protocols are very important to, I would think, to assure good community policing. And so I was wondering, what are the major constraints in hiring good candidates? You mentioned that on the Outer Banks, recruiting is somewhat difficult. What are the main constraints? And along that line, are any incentives provided, like I don't know, tuition reimbursement or housing assistance or signing bonuses? I know some of the bigger cities in North Carolina do things like that, but I didn't know if anything like that is done in the smaller and more rural communities.
You know, I can only speak for Nags Head, but right now we don't have any hiring bonuses or tuition assistance. Like I said, we do have our career progression program. We try to bring candidates in at a salary commensurate with their experience. But I think the issue, and I'm sure the others can weigh in, because, you know, like Captain Towler's been here for a lot longer than me, and so is the Major, but you've got to want to live in the Outer Banks, and you've got to want to make that transition. So a lot of times, I mean, some of the things I think about are trying to sell the area more than the agency. You know, hey, it's one thing to say we have a great department with equipment and support and a salary, but when you can sell the area as being a great place to live, raise your kids, we have great schools, it's more holistic than that, I think. And I don't know about the other guys, but I think I recruit as much for other agencies as I do for Nags Head, because I know we're all pulling from the same pool of officers and just trying to help each other out. But, you know, I came from South Carolina, like I was saying earlier, and we had a central academy. So it was easier, in my experience, to hire when you have that sort of that setup, because you're hiring a basic cadet, you're sending them away to school, and here they have to go to BLET and get certified before they become an officer. So if you don't have that ability to hire someone without the credentials, it hamstrings you a little bit, I think, as far as your recruiting pool.
Okay. Courtney, do you have a question?
I do. Yes, I do. I've got a couple of questions that have come in, and I think I am going to pull from the first one, and I'm going to address this to Jeff and Chief Webster and John, I think. So long story short, we had a person submit a question regarding what I believe is related to profiling. I don't know if that's a negative or if that's a technical term. I believe this question deals with that. And basically the questioner is asking, after her son, she says, was harassed with another young person late at night in Collington walking. And the question is, what reasons would an officer have to stop a young person either walking or driving late at night? And following up, what should that person do if they feel the officer is being aggressive? Jeff?
One of the main things we tell people is if you're driving a car and you're being pulled over, you know, the blue lights are behind you and you're being stopped in that, and if you have any question about whether that officer is real or legitimate, because we've all heard about, you know, people impersonating police and deputies, is, you know, you can put your flashers on to acknowledge that, hey, okay, the officer's behind me. If you have a cell phone, you can dial 911 yourself and say, hey, there's this police car behind me. Is he, you know, this is where I'm at. I'm on Collington Road and 158. Is that a real officer? Is he trying to pull me over? And then you can always pull over in a well-lit area, you know, like a gas station or something that always has lights on, to feel a little more safe off that.
Excellent. So to the panelists, why would a young person be stopped, either walking or driving?
Well, there's a lot that goes into that. I mean, if you're driving, did that person commit a moving violation of some sort to give that reasonable suspicion or the probable cause for the traffic stop? If they were walking, you know, what's going on in the neighborhood? Have there been break-ins recently? Is it a high drug area? You know, there's a lot more that goes into to stopping someone other than just stopping them for, you know, what appeared to be no good reason. A lot of times officers are looking for specific things in specific areas. And to that, if you are stopped and you feel it's unjust, you know, I know here in Nags Head we have a complaint process, and I would ask anyone to use that process. That's what it's there for. It's to be very open and transparent. And if you feel you've been wronged, you can go through the complaint process, and you know, we can get you an answer as to why you were stopped that particular night, and hopefully it'll clear things up. But if not, you know, we'll have to go from there.
John, any comments?
So a couple. The first is that clearly the officer involved in this did not attend Mr. Joyner's verbal judo class, or else he would not be getting a complaint. Or if he did attend it, he didn't pay great attention, because that's exactly what verbal judo does, is help de-escalate a situation, helps you explain yourself and your actions. A couple things run through my mind. One is that there's always a balance in what we are trying to do as the police versus what the perception is of what we're doing. And it's difficult to address that balance sometimes. The others sort of have covered the different reasons why the person may have been stopped. There's, it's hard for me to imagine here in this law enforcement community of the beach, of people being stopped for no good reason. There would be some sort of reason. But here's the other thing, is that there's different, let's say there's two basic sort of different stops. One is a voluntary encounter, and one is an enforcement encounter. And if I, as a police officer, come up to you on the street or as you're walking through Carlton and say, hey, may I speak to you for a second? That's a voluntary encounter, and you can walk away from it. If you don't want to deal with that officer, man, no thanks. I don't want to talk to you right now.
Okay.
You know, cheers. Now, if the officer's taken an enforcement action because you've thrown trash on the ground, or you're somebody who has a warrant on them or whatever, then you're not free to leave. That's no longer a voluntary encounter. And at that point, the officer should be explaining to you why you've been stopped and, you know, what's going to come of that stop.
Mr. Joyner, do you have any, what do you train your officers to do as far as stopping someone late at night, particularly a young person?
Well, you know, I would hitchhike on what Captain Towler mentioned, as well as Chief Webster. You know, it's really hard to, when you don't really have a lot of context in terms of what the stop was, you know, what was the stop about per se, because it could have been an investigative stop. You know, officers perform hundreds or literally thousands of investigative stops a day. You know, and it could be something along the lines that there was a call, there was a prowler call, and a person matched the description. And in an investigatory stop, generally speaking, an officer is going to make an interview. He's going to conduct a field interview to determine if the individual that they are encountering, and this is what we would train in verbal judo, is in a situation like that is to ask, because basically what we're attempting to do at that point initially is to generate what we call voluntary compliance. And when an individual becomes combative, then we can also train and teach our officers to go to the next step, set context for the stop. You know, whether it be, you know, when you make the initial encounter, you introduce yourself, sir, I'm Officer Joyner with the Nags Head Police Department. And the reason why I stopped you today is because we got a call. We got a call that there was a prowler in the area, and the description that we were given, you know, fits the description of yourself. And if you don't mind me asking you, and then going on and on and on. But if the individual becomes sort of difficult and begins to say, well, why? Why are you stopping me? That's the purpose of setting the context. Well, the reason why, and we're talking again about tone of voice and not allowing our egos to get in the way of, you know, diffusing or de-escalating the situation. And then as it goes around, you know, the 5 steps, and I'm not gonna get all the way into that, but generally speaking, we're training our officer to be mindful of tone, setting context, and then if we get to a point where we need to move forward or move to the next step, we can provide options. You know, and these options may sound something like, you know, I'm just trying to investigate a call. You know, I'm gonna let you go on your way. You'll be home with your feet kicked up on your table. Those type of things. So again, without setting context for the race or the profiling question per se, it's really difficult to pinpoint exactly what this officer is dealing with in this encounter, and then address it based upon what's put on the table per se, if that makes sense.
I'll piggyback on Mr. Joyner's hitchhiking and say that from after I, you know, or in the early days when I started and was kind of trying to learn the job, I found like 80% of the resistance to whatever I was doing stopped as soon as I explained upfront what was going on. For example, in a traffic stop, sir, good afternoon. I'm Officer Towler with Killable Hills Police Department. I stopped you for speeding. You were going, you know, 67 at a 50. May I see your license and registration? And man, you lay that out there like that, and that just makes it go so much easier. Now you're going to have people that want to argue with your radar or what you saw or didn't see, but they're going to be a small percentage. When you lay it out there, and like Carlton said, with taking your ego out of it, explaining what you're doing, that makes life so much easier for you. And it takes guys a while to learn that. And some guys never learn that. And they go through life, you know, wanting to be a tough guy. And they're the ones that wind up in my office and these other gentlemen's office with the complaints.
Okay, excellent. Glenda, the next question.
Okay, let's see. Well, we have one. Some people give their names and some people, it says anonymous. So this person gave a name, so I'll just say who the question is from. Laura Singletary. And she says, what happens if an officer has complaints? What if there is behavior that violates policy? How is police, all right, let me start over. First, she says, how is police misconduct handled? What happens if an officer has complaints? I think she means against him. What if there is behavior that violates policy? And let's see, let's direct that to Chief Webster.
Sure. You know, officers who, and I'm assuming, well, let me start off with the basics. If an officer violates policy or they draw a complaint, that there's an investigation, and if it's found during the course of that internal affairs investigation that they have violated policy, then there's generally sort of, it really, I hate to say lawyer speak, but it depends what policy they violate, because it could, the punishment for that could be anything from, say, an oral warning all the way to termination, depending on what the policy violation is. But if an officer begins to accumulate complaints that are founded complaints, valid complaints, then there's usually some sort of, and it's usually at the town level, some sort of matrix where, you know, if you do this violation, they pile, they stack on one another until, you know, the ultimate at some point would be termination. But there's a lot of levels in between there. I mean, there's, like I said, oral warning, there's written reprimands, there's retraining. I mentioned the wellness piece earlier. It could be something that an officer's having trouble in their life and need to go to an EAP program to get some sort of help with what they're experiencing in their personal life, which might be leading to some problems on the job. So it's multifactorial, but that's in a nutshell. You know, they stack on one another, and then, like I said, you know, it could be anywhere from an oral warning all the way to termination.
And if I can jump on that as well, and change the conversation a little bit towards some of the reforms that I think would be helpful, that would help us do our job better. Currently, if one of our officers goes to work for Chief Webster, or someone from the sheriff's office comes to work for us, their personnel file doesn't travel with them. We don't know what that person or that officer has done as far as, you know, complaints. The only way to get it is to ask them to sign a waiver to allow us to have access to it, which they don't have to do. Of course, you don't have to hire them if they don't, but and that should be something that's automatic in law enforcement. That if, you know, you've got officers that, as Chief Webster said, sometimes they start to stack the complaints up and they think, well, maybe it's time to go somewhere else, start fresh. And it would be nice to know at the agency where they're trying to make their fresh start that they've had, you know, issues in the past. So that's one thing that we could do as law enforcement that would help us keep and retain good officers and help sort of weed out the ones that maybe don't need to be doing this job.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned that. There's a push at the state level and through the North Carolina Police Chiefs Association to sort of standardize these hiring practices statewide. And I know, for example, an officer in state could move from one department to another without having a background investigation conducted. And that's one of the proposals on the table to be changed. So you would pick up that tarnished badge, you know, if there was someone out there who was moving from the department to department, running away from problems.
Almost all jobs, they do, you know, they check your references or check your past employment to find out, you know, get a recommendation of some sort. So I didn't realize that they actually have to sign a waiver before you can check the background. Wow.
And even in other jobs, I mean, what is your tendency if you're a boss? You know, somebody leaves and goes to work for somebody else, unless they've really done something horrible, you're probably going to give them an okay recommendation, especially it's verbal. But with the police file, you know, there's a written piece of paper that said this officer did, you know, X, Y, Z, and the complaint was founded. And so it's a little bit more concrete than what you would get just, you know, passing a word of mouth, a verbal recommendation. Your neighbor who you're asking, yeah, he's a good kid, I knew him 15 years ago, I'm sure he'll do a fine job for you. That's you know, it's a lot to base the authority that you're going to invest in somebody as a police officer on for that sort of background.
And to be sure, you know, when someone's hired in law enforcement, there's a thorough background investigation conducted. But like the captain was saying, there's some hoops to jump through to get some of the information.
I see.
Oh. So the questions are piling up. Glenda, I've got one.
Okay.
And we're gonna get to a lot of questions. So if we could just have almost a yes or no from the panelists. And the question anonymously submitted is, does your department have body cams, and when do the officers use them? Jeff.
The sheriff's office does have both body cams and in-car cameras. We do not have one on every single officer due to budget constraints. We don't have in-car cameras in every single car, but we have many. And they use them whenever they're encountering I call for service dealing with the public.
Thank you, John.
Every officer, a body camera, an in-car camera, they're activated for any calls for service dealing with the public. They are machines that run off of rechargeable batteries, so they are fallible. But we do a pretty good job of recording, and quite frankly, they, I'd say 90% of the time, exonerate the officer when there's a complaint about their conduct, that it's, you know, the camera shows that it's not what the complaint alleges.
Chief Webster?
Yeah, cameras.
Does Nags Head have them?
Yes, ma'am. Cameras are a game changer. We have in-car cameras and body-worn cameras, and we turn them on during any citizen encounter.
Excellent. Glenda, next question.
Yeah, this question was submitted anonymously. Should voter intimidation during the election period become a problem, how would local law enforcement cope with a group of armed activists appearing at a voting location? So, how would you handle that? Let's go to Major Deringer. How would your department handle that?
I can tell you that we would deal with it very swiftly and approach to find out what the intentions are and what is going on and why are you armed?
Okay. What about Major Towler? How would it be handled in your jurisdiction?
Well, the polling place happens to be right next door to our police station, so I have looked into this a little bit. And first of all, private militias are outlawed in all 50 states. There's no private citizens militia that it can operate lawfully. So they make it easy on us if they show up, you know, in uniforms, claiming to guard the polling station with their long guns, because then they're in violation of the law. If they're just a private citizen who's out there trying to make whatever statement they're making by appearing with the weapons, then I default to my new friend Carlton's training that he gives us, and you try to talk and de-escalate that situation so it doesn't lead to violence or confrontation, which lands you on the front page of the Norfolk paper.
Courtney, do you have another question? And then I think I have one after that, and then maybe we'll cut
Chief
it off.
Webster, did you want to weigh in on that scenario of armed protesters at the polling site?
Yeah, it's like the captain said, it's kind of an easy one there, because if they're armed and they're protesting, they're in violation of one of our town ordinances for sure. But it would also take some work dealing with the commission as far as how they wanted to handle it, what level of has there been any violence? I mean, there's a little investigation to go into this, but I like the major's response also. It needs to be dealt with very, very swiftly. We wouldn't want to have people out there scaring people from the right to vote. I mean, that's just a precious right we need to protect.
Excellent. Okay, the next question is, right on topic. This question is anonymous, and it says, what does a citizen do if they encounter a police officer who does not appear to be exercising proper de-escalation techniques? What can we do in an encounter where we believe the officer is escalating and not de-escalating? What is your advice? What should we do?
Well, from a training perspective, we're training our officers, and then I'll get around to answering that question as it relates to the perspective of the citizens. When you meet a combative subject, or in this case, someone that feels as if they've been unjustly stopped and they're seeing more than reasonable force been applied. We're asking them to first comply, as the officer explains, ask questions, and then complain. And it sounds like a PSA. And there's a couple of PSAs running around in New Hanover County and other areas, but we're asking simply to comply, as the officer explains, ask questions, and then complain. This ensures, because as far as our officers go, officer safety is always going to be the number one thing. Officer safety is always going to be the number one thing. He or she wants to leave the shift alive. And if we can keep things, if we can keep tempers from flaring, and if we can just, again, get through that encounter alive, then there's always time, as the chief mentioned earlier, to file a complaint if need be. But it's probably not a good idea to try and resolve a dispute on the side of the highway with a law enforcement officer. And as things escalate and get out of control, the potential for there to be a use of force incident is going to increase. So again, comply, and then let them explain and ask questions if you have them. And then if you need to, you can complain. Yeah.
I have one question here. This was submitted by Tony DiBernardo, and he says, what are best practices for building trust between police and communities? And I know Chief Webster addressed this in his remarks, and so did Major Deringer. And I see that, as I mentioned in the introduction of Mr. Joyner, he has taught a class called Community Relations Before the Crisis. So I'll turn to him to answer what he thinks would be best practices to build trust in the community.
Okay, so with community-oriented policing, the one thing we stress to build those relationships, of course, it has to happen before the crisis, as you mentioned, or it needs to happen before the crisis. But also, it's important to identify stakeholders. Stakeholders in the community provide the officer or the agency with a medium to maintain good relations with the community. Our stakeholders may look different in every community. Those stakeholders may include, homeowners, nonprofit organizations, local business leaders, local business owners, crime stoppers, if you will, or it'll come back to me. But there are crime prevention proactive tools that you can use to build those relationships, but certainly you want to establish them early enough. One of the programs that we implemented back in my former agency was called Cops and Barbers. Cops and Barbers provided our agency, and continues to do so, with a platform to maintain a good close-knit working relationship with members of the community. And because a barbershop is sort of like a pseudo sanctuary where people come in and kind of talk about everything and everything that's going on in their communities, it was a good fusion for law enforcement in terms of being able to step into that environment and basically talk about the issues that are affecting that particular community. And out of that program evolves into opportunity to build trust in the community and use that as a platform as well to spin off into other programs with the community, where you might want to start a youth drive, targeting the youth, as Major Deringer mentioned in his opening, that being a focal point. Because again, the earlier you start, as you mentioned, then you're able to get ahead of it. I much rather deal with a 5, 6, and I was an SRO for a long time. And I much rather deal with a 5 or 6 year old problem than to have to deal with a person that's 15 and 16-year-old and is still exhibiting some of the same antitrust behaviors toward law enforcement. So it's very important to sort of build that relationship early. And I think you can also take that into the communities and use it as a tool as well.
Thank you. I think we've pretty much covered the questions that have come in. Don't you?
I think we have. I think we hit on the major ones.
So let's see. Why don't we ask each panelist to just briefly summarize in a short sentence, if you can do that, the major takeaway that you would like the audience to get from your presentation. We'll start with Mr. Joyner.
Sure. As you have heard, I think you've heard from the heart. Everyone is represented on the panel as it relates to community policing. It being an integral part of what we do in the profession. For the most part, we all understand the importance of partnering with our community partners, our stakeholders, in building trust and expanding that into other areas of our communities. To restore faith in our brotherhood. We understand that there's been a major hit that we've taken in the past 4 or 5 years. And that's because of the impact of what's seen through the media and promoted through the media. But for the most part, we're all passionate about what we do. I'm second generation law enforcement. So I came into this industry knowing a lot about what I would be getting into and what to expect. And so I joined it with the same passion that I saw exhibited in my elder. And so I just say that to say that we're working as hard as ever to try and mend some of the breaches that have occurred over the past 4 or 5 years. We're attempting to do that through training. And we're seeing officers coming in from all across the state to get our training, whether it be verbal judo, whether it be community relations training, like Truth, which is basically bringing to the forefront or making us more aware of some of the biases that we may have unconsciously and don't know about. And so we're seeing that desire to get training, even at local agencies. We've been called upon to come out to give the officers the tools to use. Because at the end of the day, again, we're trying to promote change where we see change is needed to make it safer for our citizens, as well as for the officers that are going out here on a nightly or daily basis and putting their lives on the line to ensure that at night we're able to rest safely at home in our beds.
Major Deringer, what would be the key point that you want people to take away from this?
Don't be afraid to talk and ask questions. The officers need to get more into the community to know the citizens and to know the community problems. And then the citizens, I mean, we're very blessed in the sheriff's office, but the citizens don't need to be afraid either to approach to talk to us. So don't be afraid to reach out.
Thank you. Chief Webster, what would you want people to take away from this?
Well, I think to begin with, officers, we wake up every day and we put on our uniforms, we put on our badge, and we want to do the best we can for our communities. And I truly believe that. I don't believe any officer sits out there and wakes up in the morning and says, you know what, today I'm going to go hurt somebody. That would have to be an extremely rare event. But I think, given that, we all need to be empathetic towards one another. Officers need to try to understand why a person is where they are, as far as maybe, if it's a crime they've committed. We need to really try to show some empathy. And at the same time, I would ask the public to do the same, because you don't know what the officer is going through, what they have been through. The things we see on a day-to-day basis, they do affect you. They change you. And I think sometimes people, they look at us as these infallible beings who don't make mistakes, and we do make mistakes. So that's all I would ask, is that people try to be understanding, but also that law enforcement officers, sort of step from beyond that badge on occasion and try to figure out the root cause of why somebody is doing what they're doing.
Okay. And Captain Towler, what would you want folks to take away?
Well, police work is a human institution, and as Chief Webster said, we're imperfect, we're fallible, and so the forum's question was, could it happen here? And yes, any worst case scenario could happen here on the Outer Banks. We train regularly for school shootings and mass casualty events. Do we hope it doesn't happen? Of course we hope it doesn't happen. And everyone thinks that the Outer Banks is kind of this magical place, but we're not Hogwarts with a shield to keep the Dementors out. Bad things can happen here. And the way that you combat those bad things from happening are, in my idea, three ways. One is the education of the officers, one is the education of the public, and the third important one is good leadership. If you don't have leaders at the top of your organization who are respectful and buy into the idea that we can do better, that there needs to be change, that there is and has been some systematic problems in law enforcement that need to be addressed, then you're not going to get anywhere, because they're just sitting there singing with the choir that's saying, we're fine, everything's good, we've had a black president, we're in a post-racial society. Well, it's not entirely true. And so, I could drone on about that for another half an hour, but I'll just leave it at educating the public about what we do, and educating officers about the populations that they encounter, and especially, and maybe Carl, hopefully your class about race relations gets into some of the history of why there's this mistrust. In the living memory of people walking around today, there were separate water fountains, and there were, people had segregated restaurants and schools and stuff. That's still very much a part of people's conscience and their children's conscience. And I don't think we, white police officers, sometimes recognize that and understand where some of this animus is coming from. And it's one thing to say, we have to respect that we're not trusted as the police, but why are we not trusted? It's important to understand that. And when you understand those things, you start to have that empathy and sympathy. So that's my 3 cents.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, I think at this time, speaking on behalf of the Dare County League of Women Voters, we are extremely grateful for each and every panelist taking their invaluable time actually, to share their expertise and their points of view with us in the community. We do believe that dialogue and understanding are key to a civil and more peaceful society. I would also like to thank tonight's listening and participating audience. Many thanks from the League of Women Voters for your attentiveness and support of this very special League program. We hope that your time spent with us tonight has made you a more informed and more engaged citizen. Please join us for future League presentations and do consider a membership in the Dare County League of Women Voters. At this time, I would like to just give some reminders. Early voting lasts until October 31st at 3 locations in Dare County. Don't forget that you can log on to vote411.org. There is an online voter guide to learn about local and national candidates. Second announcement, we have posted the DARE Board of Commissioners and Board of Education candidate forms on the League website, which is www.lwvdarenc.org. Once again, that's www.lwvdarenc.org. And finally, in case you forget, Election Day is November 3rd.
And one other announcement, next month in November, we plan to have we used to have what we called hot topic luncheons about once a month, but of course, with the pandemic, we're not having the luncheon. We're doing it by Zoom. And for November, we plan to have someone from the executive director of the Minority Coalition of Dare County speak, tell us basically what his organization is doing and what they have on their agenda. We don't have the exact date yet. We know it's going to be in November, probably around the mid-November, and that would be at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And we will be getting back or posting it exactly what the date will be. So keep an eye out for that. We should have that date nailed down within the next week.
And malicious, stay away from our polling places.
No.
Okay.
Good night.
Thank you all very much. This was absolutely
you.
great. Thank you for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Y'all be safe
Thank you
now.
all.
Be safe out there.
Be safe, fellas. Take care.